I'm sure to be all but assaulted for making preparations as though I were a teacher who had bona fides. And that doesn't satisfy the requirements of the great grand scheme critique. And as you can see right here, I made notes because these tapes don't always turn out. Sometimes I have to start over and go at it again. So make myself presentable for Kamala. I pronounced that name correctly. So in the last few days, we've seen release of JFK um, documents that have been withheld for many, many years, 50 some years. Well, they were organized to present themselves with some relevance, which is, of course, very good because it was, to begin with, a very good day for JFK buffs like myself to see some new material and to discover it organized in a way that underscores its relevance to the current times. One of the things that was prioritized in this release of materials was that Thomas Buchanan's ideas he published before the Warren Commission did were given a stake in the venture. And he was, of course, roundly critiqued right away. But his basic presentation was that for Oswald to get a job, a favored worker job in downtown Dallas at that time, made him a favored peasant, or what we learn as essential workers. I'll explain what an essential worker was. My grandfather, on my mother's side, an Irishman, who was a distinguished citizen. They both were distinguished citizens of Poplar Bluff, Missouri, officially by vote of council. They were married 66 years, but he was of a generation that was of age to volunteer, attempt to volunteer in both world wars, and he was turned down as an essential worker because he was in newspapers. Well, somehow by hook or by crook, the attackers in NATO who have allied themselves with a new order, who killed JFK, use me to explain themselves. And what comes down to, for example, my comment about teacher preparations, it boils up out of an obscure realm of thinking that I should say whatever comes off the top of my head to prove my sincerity, but they had implanted a neuroplasm with traumatic memories, a very rude corporate technology. And that's what they wanted me barking, is what they had implanted. And the idea of narrative and critique is one of the bona fides of an active, celebrated intellectual. But the critique is nullified from the get-go in terms of legitimacy because of due process in court of law. They claim that they are both victim and jury, judge and jury in my head. See, that doesn't work that way. You have judge, jury, and then you have defendant, prosecution, and then there's laws of evidence. But they put all that aside because these intellectuals at UW, Carnegie Mellon University, and University of Pittsburgh all claim that as I grow into my role, I would learn about why they chose to use me to explain themselves. And of course, they didn't allow me to attend school and they purposefully deafened me. And they saw my attempts to get an education as being very sneaky. And this terrible prank comes from, I'm deeply offended that salaried professors in administration, people well paid with um, assisted living packages if they grow old and decrepit and unable to assist themselves. Would lure me to Seattle with a group that promised protection from abuse, and then poison me in the heart, the stomach, the mouth, knowing I was deaf and had a neurotrauma. They gave me diabetes, they chemically castrated me, and now I have Parkinson's from poison crimes by these Aztec viziers of UW Dialectical. So, as you can imagine, my goal is to use them to explain themselves. And so, in a very interesting way, they're right that it's not about me, it's about due process in a court of law. One of the things that's interesting about why education is valid is that Todd Peterson and Jordan Peterson, and Buckminster Fuller both made the point that we've been enriched by technological discoveries. Jordan Peterson couldn't find a single student who would give up his iPhone for life for less than $1 million. So, we're doing okay in some ways. But rather than let them use me to explain them, I'd like to allow them to explain themselves. And their idea that they have legitimacy and that you should be able to engage them in a critique stems from the guru in the celebrity laboratory of Mick Jagger it's a terrifying game for them. The guru wrote a book called All and Everything. His name is Gurdjieff. And Bowie was allowed to codify symbols into our society, like for the 74 of the date of the script was a symbol for gay marriage. So why they should go along with it in the name of social progress. I don't know if anybody really explained that to them. But, Africa isn't innocent in this. The UN was all spoiling for symbolic conquest in the Two Virgins war game that they ran. And the engagement of All and Everything is maniacally rooted by people who don't really care about law or the ethics of the courtroom or what they did to me and how offensive, deeply offensive what they did to me is, what they continue to be. By claiming that the Latino Studies Department can make out that Trumpy Toon was building Crowry's Wall to keep out the people who his ways had set up. So they see themselves as very refined, fourth dimensional colonialism sorts. And if you go back to the thinking processes that are encrypted in Murder JFK, I would argue that the evidence shows that Oswald worked in a place called Jagger because of Jagger's involvement, that the 11 is one man, one vote, that the 2-2 actually was encrypted for about Desmond Tutu because it sets off the idea of viral multiplication. They use Mark for Mark Twain, Mark David Chapman, and Mark Mancini both had Mark Man in their names. And Ronnie and Casper attacked me, and there's a Donald. Jekyll Island was the first names club. So Jekyll and Hyde, everybody, man is man was something Bertolt Brecht wrote. So they have James is James, the weight is weight. And the Mysterian idea that John Lennon as God should be sort of hooted by the people who believe in animal rights because, you should metamorphose into a cow if you want to be sacred person and so on. I mean, it's Mick Jagger's mental laboratory. Now, I am a little bit fragmented in a way, so having me off Broadway is perfectly okay for me. But when it comes to the situation, I'm trying to explain this to public school students, basically. People in the public who are being betrayed. But it does stand to reason that the world we live in is asserting itself over us. I should make some comments about, for example, Ukraine, U-24's Mercy mission to alleviate famine and the Minsk Accords all sound good to me. Putin said about Anna Politkovskaya that her death did more damage than all of her writings. Well, by the same idea, I think he should let go of those women whose humane feelings for Russian soldiers led them to spread words of concern and are being held without trial. I mean, I don't understand. I do realize that the early POWs gave testimony showing that they deeply sympathized with Ukraine and were opposed to the invasion. Maybe that's what he's afraid of, is humane feelings for one another. I do not know that. I am in the brainwashed West. So what they say about me, of course, is I think it's all about me, and I'm going to have to get into that. When they chose me as an elite member of American Thinking Society. But of course, the critics, particularly one vociferous individual in the JFK community, howled that I was trying to get people to say, wow, man, oh, don't worry. Nobody in Appalachia or Pittsburgh is going to say, wow, man. They're going to go along with you. They're going to say he thinks he's better than us. Pitt knows what a captive fan means because they captured a fan and tortured them. And they emphasize the ruling cynicism. For example, outside the University of Pittsburgh used to stand a man who both resembled Kanye West and John Lewis, and that's typical of the satire that Peter Gabriel considers to be his all and everything mind blender machine. I'd like to read you, they're often Nobel Prizes for the great names in show business. I'd like to read you one of their gurus, Van Passen, Pierre Van Passen. He says he's a good, he's okay. He says Carl Jung speaks of the archetypes. These, I take it, are the master cells in the brain, who by their primacy give direction, stimulate the evolution of the mind. They're oldest impressions hidden in the dark waters of our consciousness, the roots, as it were, of the mental flowers. They are their content control the transmission of heredity characteristics and set the tone for what is to follow, epigenetics. My feeling is that when, as the saying goes, we speak our mind, we don't speak alone. The archetypes also have their word to say. Our fathers speak with us and through us. So this is our idea of archetypes, the important people, the celebrity superstate. The other people have to vie to be essential or good riddance. So, there is a lot to be said for famine relief. And I believe that a certain feeling of justified salvation and redemption comes when you help both people. But what sort of gibberish is coming out of these administrators and salary professors that they would do something this dark, decrepit, strange, and cruel to a deaf child who was clearly very brutally tortured? And they always say, oh, because I had enough clues. Well, they denied the clues. One of the clues is that Oswald worked at a place called Jagger. And they politically taunt with these clues as though nobody's ever going to pay any attention to it. They barricaded the schools, talk about being forbidden to go to school. This wasn't Pakistan, this wasn't the Mississippi Delta, and I wasn't black. But I was brutally tortured and refused to go to school. Meanwhile, they impinged a special education. One of the Dalai Lama's favorites was a lesbian for magical religion from Swarthmore called Tammy Simon. They Bush Trumpy tuned out with T. Simon Farasani for Hypatia feminist philosophy journal, and she was an archetype of Lenin. So this is very strange. Bush agency, yammering from Peter Gabriel salons will be everything you need. You know, if you can have a virgin if you want one, queer ball. Well, the thing is that there was a lot more going on at CCAC than they made it out to be. You had Oliver Stone's attaché, Sir Wecht circling me. You had a man who believes that the archetype system forces him to vote for um, Obama, even though Obama's just role playing the colonial drone warrior of George Bush craze. And you had a girl who I loved, and you had the fact that I had faith in King Crimson. There were a lot of factors involved. The UN was playing a role. Michael Reagan comes in with people saying, don't defecate where you eat. Well, he defecated all over the United States by his temper tantrum. Melina Cerna's name from the Committee of Goodwill, Olga Havok, was used to rape a mentally retarded deaf girl that has epilepsy, and they told me a cop did the raping. His whole idea that Jimmy Carrey was worse than his father comes down to his favorite scene, where a 9-year-old was bukkake to sell pictures through Secret Sotheby's for Yoko Ono. It's an outrage. But this sort of degrading um, Bush degradation system, it's at the root of their um, idea that all and everything is being engaged when they make themselves paramount. What does the idea of archetypes really translate to? Well, I'll give you a clue. It begins with a D. Still don't get it? Okay, D-O. Still don't. It's a word I'm not sure was made up in Pittsburgh, but it's sometimes used there. D-O-O-F-B-A-G, doofbag. That's what their cerebral banter amounts to. Now, they were assuming I would just sort of fumble my way into serving them because it's hard to contradict the idea that Vince Irene needs your pocket money, needs your lunch money more than you do. And they're picking on a deaf man who's very poor when the upper 0.1% have taken $50 trillion out of the pockets of the middle class. And I'm going to fumble my way into serving them by not understanding such issues as the value of dignity to the very poor. It's a right-wing value. But, you know, when Derek Parfit comes along with what he calls the repugnant conclusion that if you pour money downward, if you give the $50 trillion back, it'll just make the rich poor too. It's supposedly being protected by the right-wing value of the dignity of the very poor, who just simply want, you know, their right to life protected and their hard work rewarded. Well, that has to be attacked in the Vince Irene show. And the difference between Roberto Clemente and Edgar Martinez, when they both come from Puerto Rico, sort of hinges on this. Roberto Clemente was a wealthy celebrity, true, but what he loved most was to play baseball with sticks and stones with the poor in the barrios in Puerto Rico. He loved to mingle with the poor. He understood their dignity. Edgar Martinez has this sort of Graham Nash pistol in the pocket. And anytime anybody asks him in the bar why he's got a pistol, he says John Lennon. This is his sort of doofbag, D-O-O-F-B-A-G, nature of reality, Second Amendment thing that they say will go help boat people, queer ball, improve your mettle. Well, that has been pot boiling. I went to see Fripp in Philadelphia, and there was smoke from Mordor in the sky. It can only have been a deliberate effort to turn our atmosphere into a furnace. You know, what they're after is armed lust in a dying world. You know, talk about don't defecate where you eat. What are you doing to the planet with your mighty machine of fossil fuel, Michael Reagan? What are you doing to the Committee of Goodwill by depriving a deaf seizure victim of torture the solace of someone who loves them. And what are you doing poisoning a poet with Parkinson's so that UW can have a funny little drama show going at the end of life where a poor man doesn't even have money for assisted living? There's something wrong with these Attilas. And the most ironic comment ever made was Robert Fripp saying to me, sometimes reading can do more harm than good because that way is the road to confusion. There's never been a witch doctor attending a Attila like the way that Fripp caters to Ringo Starr. Reading can do more harm than good, or did you mean to say listening to rock music can do more harm than good? Because there's very few men who are so devoid of empathy or see sensitivity in Karen as a stage prop than Ringo Starr. It's a deeply ironic and offensive um, maneuver from the alchemy of the chemistry set of Mick Jagger's so-called ethical laboratory and the co-prosperity voodoo of Yoko Ono. So they're merciless people, and merciless people indeed, but they're also the ruling cynicism. And you will notice that they star me in a dependency deliverance system. From the very beginning, they took me to the film Deliverance. And we know what judge and jury in our head really mean to these pranksters. And I'm supposed to be woke because I've learned that I can possibly live for some time with Parkinson. Who knows? Well, it's certainly not something I knew very much about, and people should certainly know something about it. But it's deeply offensive that they would poison me over a penny when they should be talking about $50 trillion that have been distributed upward. These salaried administrators and faculty who are playing an Aztec war game and calling themselves Seattle and Pittsburgh. Don't worry, Trip Dude, nobody's going to say wow.